What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another video from the 107 MMA channel. And today's video is about yesterday's interview with Renato Moicano, Money Moicano. What a legend in the sport of mixed martial arts and in the UFC. And I really wanted to talk about this because I had made my own video about this entire settlement agreement, Moicano's rejection of the money. I made an entire video about it a few days ago. And this was prior to hearing Moicano's thoughts and prior to hearing Moicano on this interview going into detail about why he made that particular decision that a lot of people disagreed with. And when you hear this interview, I feel very, very vindicated because I feel like everything that I said in terms of probably why he was doing this and backing him up, because again, it's not about right or wrong. It's about what he feels internally and him making the right decision. It's not that he made a mistake because now the money's going to get reallocated. So what's the point, etc. It's deeper than that. It goes down to morality, and it goes down to, in a lot of ways, the purpose of life, in a sense of what some people might feel is why you should be here and what he feels. And to him, really what it boils down to is him trying to live by principles and do his best and be the best person he can be, whether that's is derived from his particular faith of Christianity or whether that's maybe something inside of us, something deeper down. And I think it goes back to just having a conscience. And where does that come from? I don't exactly know, but it's pretty much as simple as that. You want to feel good about the decisions that you make on a daily basis. That's really at the heart of this entire issue. But anyways, he gets into a lot of detail, and man, he makes some amazing points. I see so many people criticizing his stance and his position and his decision. And I think a lot of times the criticism is coming from hearing other people talk about the decision and why it was the wrong decision and blah, 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 without taking the time to actually listen to Moicano explain his thoughts carefully. Also, I think it's such a foreign concept to most people to be like, wait a minute, the court system says you're owed this money, right? It's some sort of a legal decision, and yet you're turning it away. That makes no sense. It's like, can you not make a decision for yourself? Maybe sometimes you disagree with that particular court decision and you don't feel right about it, and you're going to feel better in the long term. And at the end of your life, maybe you're going to feel better about that decision. So that could potentially trump a legal decision. That's such a foreign concept for people, but it's not really, because we make those decisions all the time. He even brings up some good examples in this interview to explain exactly what I just said. But anyways, we're going to get into it step by step, and I'm going to give my 2 cents as we go through. There's also, it gets at some points a little bit contentious, I think, between the two, because they disagree. But I think both of them, I'll give credit to Ariel for being pretty respectful, very respectful of allowing Moicano to voice his thoughts. But in there's a little jab, I think, at one point that Moicano even throws out at Ariel, or basically all the people that are disagreeing with his opinion. I'm right in line with Moicano. And by the way, the last thing I'll say before we jump into the clips is actually Ariel has talked about turning down gifts from the Saudis or when he's abroad helping out with these boxing events. So, I mean, I don't think that Ariel is completely, obviously, just like, oh, anything you're given, you should take. Obviously, he has points where he'll be like, no, I know somebody was offered me a gift or this and that, and I turned it away. Now, it might be a slightly different situation because I think he feels like, I don't want to take gifts from promotions because then they might expect something from me and I can't do my job fully. All right, so it might be just a purely work-based decision, or he doesn't want to make mistakes that maybe he's made in the past, whatever. But in the same vein, right, maybe that's what's going to make Ariel feel better, feel clean about what he's doing with his life and making the right decisions and setting a good example for his children. This is basically the same thing. So I don't think it's such a foreign concept to Ariel necessarily, but I just want to give that context there as we begin with this breakdown. All right, so first of all, the first point that Moicano makes, which is a very important point. A lot of people are overlooking this, but it's a very important point. And really at the heart of his argument is when he signed that contract. And there's other points in this interview where he talks about the contract in particular and that he read through everything, so he knew what he was signing. When he signed it, he agreed to the terms. He was happy with it. So regardless of what has happened since, or other people saying, hey, you know what, you were taken advantage of, he's still looking back and reflecting on that decision and saying, at that time, I knew exactly what I was getting into and I agreed with it. So I don't want somebody to come back and rewrite history, or me to take advantage of money being handed to me at this point just because why not? I should take the money. No, I'm going to stand by what I thought, and what I thought at the time was, this is a great deal and I'm happy to do it. Please.
The lawsuit, what they want to do, they want to label UFC as a monopoly, right? So they want to say, hey, UFC is a monopoly. They have not the fair practices, and that's the way they keep the money low to the fighters. And so the fighters went to they file a lawsuit to label UFC as a monopoly. Okay, so my name was over there because all the fighters at the time they were there. But what that means? That means that I will be saying the money that UFC gave me on the beginning of my career was not enough. But that's a lie, Ariel. Do you think UFC, when they first sign with UFC, they are happy or they are sad? I'm asking to you. So when UFC goes to a fighter and say, hey, this is your contract, you're going to make 10 plus 10. I don't know any fighter that went to the UFC thinking that was a bad business,
Yeah.
on the beginning of the career. Everybody's happy. So if I went to this lawsuit and say, hey, UFC cheated me, UFC was doing me wrong, I was lying because after the day that my son born, that was the happiest day of my life. I don't even care about how much money I would get from the UFC. I just want to be in the UFC.
Okay, so there it is. So at that time, he's saying, you know what? That this is the implication of me taking the money, that I was unhappy. But that's not true. I was happy. Now, you could also argue that, fine, maybe you were happy at the time, and that is the reality of the situation back then. But we're telling you now that you were taken advantage of. So we want you to review the contract, review other contracts, and recognize at this point that, yeah, maybe they had you convinced that this was a great deal, but it really wasn't. They were in violation of certain laws or whatever. And so really it was a bad deal. And while you were happy, you shouldn't have been. Okay, you were being taken advantage of. There's also this possibility that I'm not dismissing. I'm not saying just because of the state of the mind at the time you were happy, like you have to accept whatever comes, even if they followed illegal business practices, right? But I believe he's also looking back objectively. He's looking back at what was said. And he goes into more detail on this as well in the interview in terms of, hey, does he really think that what they're saying is true? Does he really think the UFC is a monopoly? He actually says no. But anyways, my point is if you now look, even if you signed it and felt happy at the time, you could look back and say, oh, now I see what they did. They did take advantage of me. Whoa, even though I was happy, I shouldn't have been. Okay, now I'll accept that settlement money. So anyways, my point is this isn't definitive in and of itself, but I think the combination of the fact that he was pleased, he knew what he was getting into, he did his research, and he was happy at the time. Plus, now when looking back, he still feels, I believe, the same way. I think that really makes a lot of sense, at least to me, that, hey, you want to stick by your word. You want to stick by what you said at the time. And on top of that, you still don't feel it's unfair. So why take this money? Because that's the implication. I totally get it. The other point that he makes next in this interview, which I said in my video, I mentioned this before. If you guys are new to the channel, just FYI, I am a licensed attorney in the state of California. I don't practice law anymore, but I did practice for just about 4 years. But I went to law school. I know a thing or two about law, but this is just a very basic thing. If you have to understand, this was a settlement, not a verdict. So a lot of people are saying, hey, look, the justice system has deemed that you are owed this money, so you should take it. You should defer to the justice system. And it's not even, and he even makes a point later on, even if the justice system, even if it was a verdict, not a settlement, I wouldn't necessarily do it either. I can still trust my morality. I don't need a third party telling me what's right and what's wrong. But anyways, just to say this wasn't a verdict, it was a settlement. And in a legal proceeding, you get settlements all the time. I saw this all the time in patent law. You get settlements all the time, regardless of the truth of the issue, regardless if somebody has done something incorrect or not, because what it is both parties are looking ahead and considering the expenditures. I mean, trials are so expensive. And on top of that, let's say you go to a jury versus a judge. A lot of times it's a crapshoot, especially with these technical contract cases or patent law cases. You don't even know if they're going to fully understand the case. So you might get a verdict that doesn't even necessarily make complete sense, that could go against you and you could be liable for even more money. Like it's such a crapshoot when you actually go to trial. So that often can also be another motivating factor to reach a settlement, whether or not this is the right outcome. So anyways, this is Moicano explaining that. He's fully aware of this. He understands it. I called it out in my first video. I'm going to link that, by the way, in the description. Check it out, and you can see I was right on the money with my entire take. But listen to Moicano in his own words.
Point is, the whole lawsuit stuff was based on UFC is a monopoly. I think they should treat the athletes better. I think they should pay more money. And so they filed the lawsuit with the lawyers. They went to the court, and at one point they say, no, let's settle this down. And they do agreement with the fighters in UFC, and they say, no, we're gonna give you 300 and I don't know how much millions. And they dropped the lawsuit. So that was not about UFC being a monopoly. That was the way for the lawyers and the fighters to get money, you know? Because if that was about UFC being a monopoly, they would say, no, I don't want the money. I want UFC label as a monopoly. Let's go to the court and let the judge decide if this is a monopoly or not. But no, they choose the money. And what that means, based on their actions, I don't think that was about doing good for the athletes. I think the lawyers, they took more than 20%. That means they took more money than most of the fighters, if not all the fighters. So 20% of 300 million is a lot of money. So in the end of the day, this is for the lawyers to make a quick cash, for the fighters to grab that money that they didn't deserve. You know why? Because they don't respect the contract.
You might listen to that and be like, wait a minute, so what? This is just a cash grab for the lawyers. Come on, that's a bit of an exaggeration. But you know, it's actually with a lot of these class action lawsuits, it is the lawyers. Like he's saying they got 20%. Sometimes you can get 30% in a class action lawsuit when you have the attorneys basically, it's a risk, right? They may get nothing. So I'm not saying it's totally unfair for them to take 20% or 30%, but I'm just saying that's how it goes. So usually they're the massive winners. The class will get, even if they get 80% or 75%, right? It's usually a big class, so they're dividing up the remainder. So it is the lawyers that are winning out massively in these class action suits when they can get to a settlement or something like this. And they were probably pressuring the class to take the settlement because, again, if they could spend all this money going through the trial and whatnot and be left with nothing if the verdict went against them. It's a massive, massive risk. So they're going to want to jump on that settlement no matter what. Now, one little thing I will say is that Ariel brings this up later. I didn't actually include the clip here, but apparently the original settlement amount was for 325, and the judge said, nah, I'm not sure I like that number. Go back. I want you to keep renegotiating. They went back to the drawing board and they came back with 375. So that's the implication. I don't know exactly what the judge said, but Ariel said the judge said I wasn't happy, so I'll take him at his word. The implication is that the judge felt as though that number was insufficient. So he's trying to say that maybe the judge did feel like that's kind of him implicitly weighing in and saying, nope, we're close to the right figure, but there should be a little bit more. And so he's that, like, as if that's giving it some credibility in terms of that settlement figure, that ultimate decision to pay out the fighters or whatever. That may be true. That may be, but the other thing you have to recognize is we're still not in the trial phase. This is still at that phase where, hey, maybe there has been some discovery done and some facts have come out, but they still haven't gone through the full process. So even if the judge felt like that, it is a good point that maybe the judge was starting to think, hey, there's something to this, but we can't say 100%. Again, this is after initial numbers for the settlement was thrown out by the attorneys and they were kind of negotiating it down. For whatever reason, the judge was weighing in slightly. So that does lend some credibility to the settlement figure, that it goes beyond simply what the two parties are agreeing to. But again, these settlements are done as a cautionary measure to basically limit the exposure from the side of the defendant. From the side of the plaintiff, they want some settlement number. They want to get in there, and for the sake of the attorney, so they can get something versus nothing and have to have this massive expense over years and years as the trial goes on and on and on, and then have nothing to show for it at the end of it. So just to give a little color on that statement, and also what Ariel said about the judge weighing in. All right, next clip, very important, key point. I trust my morality. This is what Moicano says, essentially talking about, even if it was a verdict, right? Even if it wasn't a settlement, but it was a verdict, that still wouldn't necessarily change my mind. Check this out.
At least I don't think I need a judge. I don't think I need a justice system to say what is right and what is wrong. because I have been thinking on this a lot, because a lot of people on the internet I saw saying like, Moicano is really dumb because the judge decide that the money is for the fighters, but that's not true. That was agreement. So the fighters in the UFC, they want an agreement. So the judge didn't decide anything. And even if they did, that's not means that is moral, because legality and morality, that is nothing to do with each other, because we know back in the day in America, you used to have slaves, and that was legal, and you had a document meaning that that slave is from this guy, and that was legal. The same thing with prohibition. Back in the day, you cannot drink alcohol because the law says illegal. But is that immoral to drink alcohol? Of course not. It's the same thing with marijuana. Is the same thing with a lot of stuff. So just because a judge or the justice system decide that is right and that is wrong, that doesn't mean that is right and that's wrong.
That's it. Simple. And again, I think this comes back to the bigger picture. And I'm not gonna go too deep on the spiritual side or whatnot. And it's not even about particular faiths, but I think in general, we all feel some calling to do what we feel is right, to honor other people, to be honest. I think everybody, regardless of religious faith, we know that there's probably something to the equation of life that we should try our best to be honest, and that's it. And I think that's what he's getting back to when we talk about morality. I think a piece of that is just being true to his word, in his heart, where he can feel clean about his particular actions, and that's all there is to it. Now, does this mean that his position should be rigid? Absolutely not. So, for example, he's doing what he feels is right in his heart. If he was persuaded otherwise, and he mentioned in this clip he's thought a lot about it, if he was down the line persuaded otherwise, again, that might be a reason or rationale to perhaps take the settlement money. But I believe what he's trying to say, with no ulterior motive, I take him at his word, by the way. I know some people don't. They think, no, he's trying to get in the good graces of the UFC. I believe him when he says this. And I can give you some examples in my life that are similar. Again, not with the same figures, but I take him at his word that he's doing this for his own sake, to feel clean and feel good at the end of the day. And I 100% agree. You don't need to just simply stand by a legal decision. I'll give you one quick example with, let's say, different businesses in my line of work. If I make referrals out, or you know what I mean, for in terms of education, some companies or other agencies might be like, all right, we want to pay you a commission for that referral. My stance on these types of commissions, and they're legal, like you're allowed to take them in certain cases. There's cases where you're not allowed to in certain professions. But anyways, my point is I don't feel comfortable doing that. My reason, and it's legally can be gathered. I could take it, no problem. The reason why I don't is because I personally, if I'm referring a client out to somebody else, I want to do that because I feel like I'm doing what's in the best interest of the student, not because I'm getting a cash payout. And I feel like once you start accepting those payments, now all of a sudden it can blur the lines in your mind of, are you doing this for the absolute right reason, or now is the cash clouding your judgment? I don't ever want to be in that position. To me, that's what makes me feel good. That's what feels correct to me, and that's what I'm following. Again, I'm not saying I'm the perfect person on the planet, but you could see there's examples like this, I believe, in all of our lives where we adhere to these same principles. I think we all want to feel good at the end of the day. I think what's getting people caught up is the amount of money that he is turning down. You know, if it was like $100 or something, or a smaller amount, people are like, oh yeah, I get that decision. You want to do the right thing. But now it's like, it's 100,000. Well, okay, maybe you should rethink this, or you're silly, or whatever it is, right? I do think that's part of the reason why people are being so critical of Moicano. But if you look at the root motivator for this decision, I actually don't think it's crazy at all. And in fact, I think if you do think it's crazy, you need to check in with yourself and just take a look in the mirror and be like, what are you really doing here? Is your entire life just all about accumulating assets that once you move on from this planet, they're not going to go with you? You could say, oh, but I'm doing it for my family and I want them to be set. There's no such thing as that. We don't know. You could set this up for your family in a generation or two. We don't know the state of those financial assets or how the world is going to be structured down the line. There's no such thing as being set. Also, what about the benefits of us growing up in this planet and having to work, having to grind, I mean, most people are in that situation. We have to get out there and fend for ourselves. So like, I hear this repeated all the time. Well, I want to be set and I want my family to be set. It's not, first of all, it's not, there's no guarantee. We don't know how any of this is going to play out. We don't even know how the money is going to be managed down the line. But on top of that, is that really the end all be all? Because there's always going to be, I don't know. Anyways, I just think that the real heart of what we should be trying to do in this whole thing we call life is more aligned with what Moicano's thinking. Just try and make good decisions on a day-to-day basis versus I'm just going to accumulate everything I can, regardless of any sort of principles, and just give it to everybody around me, and then everything's going to be cool. What about the importance of instilling good values in your family, in your children? Hey, you can watch what I did here, and I want you to emulate what I'm doing down the line so you can be a happier person, live a better life, etc. Anyways, like I said, I'm getting a little deep, but I think that has to be a part of the discussion to really understand Moicano's decision in this whole thing. All right, the other point that he makes next is he said, if I were to accept this money, this lawsuit was about the UFC being a monopoly, and I don't believe they're a monopoly. Could he be right? Could he be wrong? Both options are possible. But it's not as though Moicano is, it would be different if somebody had no understanding of monopolies and economics and whatnot, where they're almost like incapable of making this assessment on their own. Hey, fine, I'm going to defer to the legal system. They're saying it's a monopoly. Cool. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that approach either. For the fighters that did accept the cash, maybe that is what they truly believe. Or they have to defer to the legal system in terms of making that determination because they don't have the tools or the knowledge that Moicano has. But in Moicano's case, he's doing the analysis himself. He feels confident and comfortable with that. And therefore, when he's rejecting the money, he's saying, I disagree with this take. And I think I should know based on what I like to research and what I've read about, etc. And that's it. And this is another reason why this decision is the right decision for himself. But let him talk in his own words. Check this out.
UFC does, but I don't believe UFC is a monopoly. Why UFC is not a monopoly? Because there is no legal barriers for other shows. We have PFL, we have Bellator, and what happened? Why UFC is not a monopoly? Because there is no laws that don't let another competition comes in. You know, what happened is UFC is so much better than the competition, and they created that. If we're talking about MMA now, if you have your show, if I have my house and everything that I have, it's because UFC created a sport, and they are way better than the competition. That's why they are.
Okay. So there you go. In his opinion, he thinks that their dominance and the reason why they're above everybody is just straight up, they're better. They're the best at the production. They're the best at recruiting the fighters, are the best at making matchups, et cetera, et cetera. So it's more just really, really solid business practices versus an actual monopoly with barriers to entry. So if you guys ever study economics, that's what makes a monopoly. There are barriers to entry where nobody else can enter. Now, he mentions legal barriers, but they're not just, there can be other barriers other than laws being like, hey, you can't start an MMA promotion anywhere in the US. It's only the, something like this. But there could be other barriers to entry. Perhaps I'm not, and by the way, I haven't studied this enough to get into the intricacies. Like, obviously, I studied economics in college. I have a little bit of a law background, but I have not dove into the intricacies of this case. So I can't weigh in 100% on one way or the other, whether or not I think the UFC is a monopoly. But my point is, a monopoly would mean there are such high barriers to entry that it's basically impossible for any other companies to compete. He does make a good point that there's the PFL, there's Bellator, there's all these other regional promotions. There are other competitors. They pale in comparison, I think, because I would probably side with Moicano. Again, like, I'd have to dive more into the business practices, but it seems like, yeah, they just do a better job. And they also have a big head start. They have the name, they have the brand recognition. They do way more marketing than any of these other companies. So I think these are the reasons why they're ahead of the game. That being said, I could be wrong. There could be a lot of different things that they put in the contracts or whatnot, or the way they've structured their business that don't allow for fair competition. But at this point, Moicano's done his analysis. He's coming from a place of knowledge, not a place of ignorance, and he feels like it's not. So he feels like taking that money would be his sign off that he does believe it's a monopoly, which he doesn't. He doesn't feel good about it. That's it. Okay, another great point. All right, moving on. In this clip, I think because Ariel really disagrees with Moicano, and I think mostly coming from a good place, but we do have that narrative that seems to pop up that anytime there's something calling out the UFC or negative towards the UFC, he a lot of times will get on that side of the argument. We'll say, no, the UFC, if there's a chance that the UFC may have done wrong, I'm going to err on the side of they probably did do something wrong. Is that being purely objective? Does that have something to do with this frayed relationship with the UFC and Dana White in particular? You know, I think that's going to creep in no matter what. No, even if if Ariel's trying his best to be absolutely objective with these types of disputes, I just think that it's going to be there. And this is a case where it's not like an overt miscarriage of, you know, whatever, of him being a journalist and whatnot. It's not that. I just think that it's going to taint his opinion no matter what, and it's just inescapable. They tried to destroy his entire career. Like they tried to kill his show. They tried to remove his. I mean, basically, they tried to completely destroy him. So I don't think that's wrong for him to feel that way, but I do think he does feel that way, and it creeps in here. But anyways, when Ariel asked this question, to me, that was a subtle way to question Moicano's decision, basically being like, look, I'm not going to say that you're wrong, even though I think you're wrong. I think Ariel thinks he made the wrong choice. He says that kind of later. He's like, hey, if I was in your position, I would have taken the money. But does anybody else agree with you? And the absence of agreement, you know, sets that implication that Moicano, I guess, may have made the wrong decision. Again, if Ariel, like, to me, this is obvious. He wants to do what's right in his internal morality check. There's nothing else to be said. That's it. He wants to follow what he feels in his gut is correct. But I think like Ariel just can't wrap his mind around this notion for whatever reason in this particular case. And so that's his way, I feel like, of mounting an argument. Wait, does anybody agree with you? They don't? Wonder why, right? Like that's kind of what I think is happening here. Check this out.
Ken, since you came out with this, did any other active UFC fighters from this period message you? You don't have to tell me their names if they did, and say, I agree with you and I did the same. Did you hear from anyone?
No, I don't hear from anything. I just hear a lot of people calling me dumb.
Okay.
And maybe I am. And maybe I am dumb.
No, I saw all the people criticize. I didn't know if someone messaged you privately and said, you know what, I agree with you. Can I ask, because I think you quoted...
I think Michael Chandler, right? I think Michael Chandler, even though I have been trashing him for a long time, he was the only one that say, hey, why people are criticizing him? And I believe he was
not in that period though, so he wasn't subjected to the money. But I understand at least he was supporting.
Right, like the one person that he said did reach out and support him. He's like, yeah, but he wasn't in the period. But anyways, okay, I understand that. I think again that's Ariel trying to insert his perspective and maybe try and change Moicano's mind. But again, he's missing the point. He's not able to see it. It's a pretty open and shut case. There's nothing to it. He feels that this is the correct decision. He's not speaking from a place of ignorance. He's done his due diligence. He's looked at whether or not it is a monopoly. He's looked back at the contract when he signed it and said, I was happy at the time. He's now looking back with this knowledge and say, hey, I wasn't manipulated in any way. That's it. This is what makes me feel clean. Boom, done, out. And this is another example of Ariel simply not getting it. Also, in this clip, I feel like Moicano throws a little jab at not just Ariel, but like all the people that are criticizing him for this decision. And I think it's fair. I think it's a fair thing for him to say. Really subtle, but I'll show you when it comes up. Check this out.
Be the biggest thing, like ultimately when it comes to the settlement, do you recognize the fact that the UFC came to an agreement with the fighters and said, look, we're okay with this? And I think other, UFC officials were asked this, were like, you will not be penalized. You will not, like, we're at peace with this.
Yeah, but that's my...
It's not. It's not them. I just don't understand how that part you could say it like that. We're okay with this. It's not that we're okay with this. You're basically, when you're making a settlement, you've got this massive liability hanging over your head. Okay, if I don't settle, I could be on the hook for $1.6 billion. So you are making that decision somewhat under duress. It's not us okay with it. It's like, all right, this is a way to minimize our liabilities and our expenses. Let's do our best. They've wanted to pay nothing. Otherwise they would have paid it. This is not them being okay with it. This is them coming to that agreement or whatever. But once again, he's missing the point, right? It's not about the UFC saying anything or the people say. It's not about that. It's again checking back in with Moicano inside of himself and saying, hey, internally, this is what makes me feel right. This is what makes it feel what feels correct to me, and this is what's going to make me feel clean at the end of the day. But I'll let him continue now.
The point, I have a list of points doing,
Yes.
and I saw a lot of people say, hey, Moicano, you want to be in the good wise with the
Yes.
UFC. I cannot care less about UFC. They are a company, they want profit. And how you do profit? You maximize your gains and you cut the expenses, and UFC fighters are expenses. We saw like the Silvas and all the champions. Now UFC doesn't care about them, and that's okay. That's business. I'm not friend UFC. I am a like they say, like I'm not employee, and I'm not saying that I want to be or I don't want not to be, but this is just about money. Is my work, I'm not planning to be friends with UFC after I'm done. I'm just doing things based on what I believe and my principles. And I don't expect people that don't have principles to understand me, Right or wrong, I'm doing what I believe is right.
little jab in there at the end, right? Right or wrong, I'm doing what I believe, and I don't understand people without principles to understand. And yeah, maybe that's a little jab at Ariel. Maybe that's a little jab at everybody who is calling Moicano dumb or stupid or things like that. Also, Ariel mentioned again, because I think people just can't get their heads around, why would you do something unless it's going to have some explicit benefit for you in this life? He's like, they wouldn't have been mad. I don't think they would have held anything against you. It's like, has nothing to do with that. He's not trying to curry favor with anybody. And I know folks might think he's full of it in this case. I actually don't. I think it's right on. He's not trying to do this for any ulterior motive or curry favor or whatever. He just wants to feel okay about the things he does. We have in the US, a lot of times there can be, two people that get married and maybe one of the spouses builds a huge business while they're together, and whatever is made during that time or those assets accumulated during marriage, the law in most cases, if you don't get a prenup or anything like that, allows for equal division of those assets. But there are many times, and this is not me just saying this out of nothing, this is if you listen to family attorneys, there are occasions where even though things are legally, you can take legally in a divorce, right? You can be like, all right, I'm going to have half your business, or I'm going to take this, or I'm going to get alimony because, whatever. Those things are not accepted. One of the spouses will say, you know what? Yes, I get that I'm legally owed this, and I get that this was built during the time we were together, but in reality, they built this. They did everything. They built this entire business. Yeah, I was there, but I feel like what's being offered to me is just not fair. I don't feel right about it, and I don't want it. This does happen. It's the same thing. You could say that the court system has been set up in a particular way so that spouses, aren't left out in the cold if they had to forego certain opportunities in their career to support their spouse. But, there are cases where it makes total sense. But there are also cases where the law will say, once again, you should divide evenly. And maybe one of the people says, that doesn't feel right to me. They built this. I don't want to have an interest in it. I just don't feel right about it. And they reject it. This does happen, as mind-blowing as that may be to some people. But again, even that little example, or maybe we haven't gotten to it yet, but another example, this is a bit of hyperbole, but obviously Moicano makes the point at some time in this interview, yeah, I could go rob a house and make money that way. I know that's illegal, so it's a different situation. But my point is, we're not doing anything and everything to just accumulate more and more and more in this life, right? There are certain things we want to do things within legal guidelines, obviously, but ultimately moral guidelines, I think. All right. And one more little clip here to reemphasize this. Very simple. He's doing what he thinks is the right thing to do.
The UFC, I was a nobody. Nobody knew me. I built my career on the UFC, and I read the contract, and I say, okay, they can have the image, they can have this, they can have that, and I'm gonna sign that for this money, But people nowadays, they don't think about that. They think, hey, if I can change what I say just to have beneficial, just to have like beneficial gains, just to make more money, I'm okay with that. I'm not. I don't think that's fair. I don't think that's just. And I like to think in 10 years, 15 years, I'm gonna tell my son what I did, and that was the.
That's it. Pretty simple. He wants to be able to tell his family in the future it got cut off right there, but he wants to look back and say, yes, I did the right thing. And why is that such a foreign concept to everybody? I don't know. I guess it's the state of the world that we're in right now. You know, I had a similar thing, kind of similar, I guess, or at least can give some perspective on this, that happened to me with another company that I had signed a contract with. So it basically had to do with content creation in regards to education. And there were certain things that we put into the contract in terms of expectations. But in retrospect, when we look back, I didn't think they were going to do this to me. But in retrospect, when we look back, the contract, in terms of what I wanted, in terms of placement of my content and whatnot on their website, it wasn't explicitly outlined in the contract. However, in our emails going back and forth about where it would be placed and whatnot, obviously we had everything laid out. We had in-depth discussions, whatever. Now, eventually, the company decided not to honor the contract whatsoever. They kind of ghosted me and whatnot. So I had to get my attorneys involved to put pressure on them. Now, eventually, when they came back, they honored the bare minimum requirements that were outlined in the contract, not all the things that we had talked about in numerous emails, on numerous calls, whatever, right? Because they knew they could do that. And that was my fault for not basically putting more details in to the contract with my legal team. So at the end of the day, you know, I have to accept, unfortunately, responsibility for that. But do I think they did the right thing? Absolutely not. Like, you know what you said to me via email, via multiple conversations. You know, that's what I want. That's how I felt. Like, you should be a man of your word. I can't control other people. It is what it is. But there's another example of like, all right, fine. You don't have to leave. You know, you can get around this. Like, maybe I could push back and I could say, hey, there were certain expectations built in. It would have cost a lot of money. And that's not what I'm not on this planet to fight with people and do stuff. I want to create content. I want to create educational resources. I want to talk about MMA. I want to do stuff. I want to create stuff. So I decided to let it be. They made good on that tiny little whatever contractual obligation. They did it in the weakest way possible, but it is what it is. My point is sometimes you don't have to just simply say, all right, I'm being forced to do this by law, so I'll do the bare minimum. Just do what you said you were going to do. Just do the right thing. I don't see why that's the craziest thing in the world. But anyways, now here's a little clip where, okay, I have to defend Ariel here because I actually don't think he was trying to do something. Remember in the video I made about Jamal Hill where he was like really trying to put words into it in his mouth and really trying to paint him in a negative light? I actually don't think that's what he was doing here. But I think people are so on edge when they talk to Ariel that he's trying to do something untoward that he called him out and he said, you're trying to twist my words. So it was just a fun little clip. But Ariel backs up and Ariel likes Moicano. I don't think he's trying to do anything negative to him whatsoever. But anyways, here's a little clip in case you missed it.
About MMA, and UFC is the best promotion. But again, I'm not changing anything to be in a good wise UFC. Again, I cannot care less about UFC because UFC doesn't care about the fighters. It's simple as that. So again, I'm not.
What do you mean by that when you say that UFC doesn't care about the fighters? That's a big statement.
Let me. You're trying to twist my words. I know. Not twist my words.
No, Renato. You know, did you hear what I said about?
Let me ask you something.
Wait, before you go. Wait, please. Before you continue, did you hear what I said about this story?
No, I did not hear because again.
Okay, but let me just tell you. I said that.
Hold on. Pause. I have to jump in here. Ariel's so sensitive about this topic because so many people call him out for it all the time. So he wants to correct everything. You know, the funny thing is I'm going to just preface what he's about to do in case so you don't miss it. But actually what he does here to try and defend himself and say, I wasn't trying to twist your words. He goes off on a tangent. Yeah, he kind of actually does this. So he's trying to say, no, that's not what I was trying to say. And then he brings up something completely different. I guess you could say it's related, but he talks about how he was supporting him and being positive towards him. I guess basically trying to say, hey, man, I had your back. So that means I'm not trying to twist your words right now, which the two are not really connected. I guess you can say it's connected in the sense that he likes Moicano and is trying to do right by him. But look, I know exactly what Moicano was saying. Now, in the heat of an interview, you're listening to certain things. Maybe you don't fully understand what he's saying in that moment. What he was saying is simply this, which is basically true for the vast majority of businesses. It's like when he says they don't care about the fighters, he's saying, look, a business, of course they care about their employees. It's all part of a team. But at the end of the day, it's revenue driven, it's profit driven. And if certain pieces of that company are no longer driving profits, or no longer helping you to achieve whatever the mission statement is, those people we let go. This happens with employees. You get fired, you get moved around, this and that. That's what he's trying to say. So he's just saying it from a general standpoint of like, I'm not so delusional to think that the UFC cares about us, loves us, thinks of us as family. We are assets, we are vehicles by which they can generate profit, generate revenue, etc. So it's not that they care about us. They're using us as a means to an end. That's all he was saying. But then Ariel hones in on the UFC doesn't care about the fighters. Expound on that, because again, I don't think this is conscious, but perhaps subconscious. I think he naturally just latches onto, I don't know, things that maybe paint the UFC in a bad light. Again, I don't begrudge him for that because of the history, but that's what I think happened here. All right, now Ariel goes on this whole diversion route of being like, no, man, I have your back, so why would I be twisting your words? But anyways.
I think you're an incredibly smart person and an intelligent person, and we all have to respect your feelings. Whether I think it's right or wrong, I said I have the utmost respect for Renato as a person. You're very smart. The way you have educated yourself, the way you think about business, even if I don't agree with everything that you say, you clearly take the time to research and learn and read. And so that's why you have my respect. So then when you say you think I'm trying to twist your words, hurts me.
Sorry.
I just want you to, I just want you to clarify or expand on the sentiment, because you know people will take that and run with it. So that's why I ask you for the follow-up.
Okay, so
I'm not trying to get you in trouble here.
Okay. So what I want to say is, not UFC. When I say UFC, I'm not saying about Dana White. No, I'm saying about the business. The business care about money because they have investors. They have people that want to care about money. So they don't see fighters as persons. They see as assets, that they're going to use. And once this guy is not giving the return, they're going to release. And again, you cannot expect a business, a company to be your friend.
So there it is. Again, that whole thing, right, where that's a bit of Ariel getting sensitive, because this is the claim, this is the knock on him all the time. He's trying to twist people's words. He's trying to put words into the mouth, whatever. Was he, he says, otherwise I wanted you to clarify because otherwise people will run with that. I don't think so. But again, in the heat of the moment, I do think maybe Ariel just misunderstood. He heard that statement. He wanted to zoom in on it. So I don't think I don't think he was trying to do something like other, things that he's done in the past. I think that was just a misunderstanding. He gave him a chance to clarify. It's all good. But again, I think that's why he jumps into self-defense mode. Hey man, wait. I have your back. I respect you, etc. So of course I wouldn't be trying to do that. There's also a piece of it like that's just programmed in, I think, at some point to Ariel, because he's been a journalist for so long. He's going to hear those phrases. He's going to zero in on it. Whatever. Okay. Now we get to another clip, and this is Moicano claiming or saying, hey, I live by principles, and just reiterating this point one more time. This is the heart of his decision. Check it out.
That's my whole
How do you feel about the fighters who took the money?
That's not up to me to decide. I can talk about myself. I don't think it's right, but again, that's a free country. The beautiful thing about America is everybody can choose. So that's not me to decide. Fair. I don't think that's right. I don't think that's right.
Okay, that's fair.
Do you think it's right? That's up to you.
Well, I mean, everyone's weighing in on your decision to not take the money, so I was wondering what you thought.
And that's okay, Ariel, because most of the people, they base their action on the outcome. I base the stuff that I do based on principles. So it's not because it's going to be more beneficial to me monetary that I'm gonna change what I say. Because one thing is, it's very easy to say, I'm a free market guy, I'm against the government, I'm this and that. But when I can prove, when I can show up, when I can tell my kids and my family that I live by my word, that's hard. And what's hard for me, I'm not telling that I'm a saint, When I heard that I would get and they start to say, hey, you're gonna get like 100,000, 200,000. I talked to Gilbert Burns, and he say it's at least 100,000 or 200,000, and yeah, that's good money for me. I would get that money and buy maybe 1.5 Bitcoin, and that would be good. But I think I want money, but I don't want money just for nothing.
I get it.
If I want money for something, I like money, but I would never rob a bank. I would never step to my work just to get money. So that's my.
And that's it. And again, you could, I'm sure people could easily be like, yeah, but this isn't robbing a bank. This was legally given to you, whatever. The point is once again, he wants to do what feels right to him. And on top of that, I think he brings up another great point too. This is actually a great way for him to really do the right thing, because it's not like, here's $5 to do the wrong thing. It'd be like, no, obviously I'm not going to do that. But when the money is larger, there's a greater temptation, especially what if your family can use that money or something like that, or you wanted to make a big purchase. Or he was saying at one point he could have bought Bitcoin and whatever, and that would be a great investment. Yes, but that's the perfect time, in my opinion, to actually make a stand and say, no, in the face of this great temptation, I'm going to stand up to it, because this life is about more than just accumulating assets in the short term, buying things, even setting up my family for the next generation, when it's not like, you're out of options. If we all grow up and we all become adults. Like we don't need to be taken care of. We're here to take care of ourselves, right? Obviously that's nice if you can have a little bit of extra, a little bit of cushion for security purposes, but I don't think that's the end all be all. I think this is actually a much more important piece of life, is just doing things in the right way that make you feel good. And by the way, when he asked like, hey, do you think other fighters are wrong for taking this? I think two things could potentially be true here. I think for Renato Moicano, based on his mindset at the time, his understanding, his knowledge of economics, him reading through the contract, I think this is right for him, because in his heart of hearts, he feels that he knew what he was getting into. He looks back now, he doesn't feel it was unfair, and he's happy with what he did, and he doesn't want to change anything. There might be another fighter who maybe had to sign the contract under duress. Maybe they didn't understand the terms, and maybe their understanding from the attorneys and whatnot changed their mind. And they're like, you know what? I shouldn't have signed it. And that's how I legitimately feel. Whether it's right or wrong, at least if that's how they legitimately feel, and they feel also that they're doing the right thing, I think two things can be true. I don't think Moicano is the only one that's right, or these guys are the only ones that are right. There could be another factor, right? Even if they felt like, all right, you know what? It was kind of fair, but hey, I don't know. Maybe they're in such a tight financial spot that this is literally if they don't accept the money, they're going to be on the streets with their family. Okay. Yeah. I'm not saying everything has to be a easy answer. Yep. You have to live by these set principles at all times. Maybe there's a point where it's like, I'm going to sacrifice my principles slightly because I'm in such a desperate position that if I adhere to my principles in this case, my family's going to suffer. And I'm just going to, I can't do that. I'm not saying it's just, oh, yep, you have to abide by this 100%. Another thing that he even says too is like, hey, look, if the money was $10 million or $20 million, I don't know if I would have been strong enough or whatnot to make the same decision. Even he's not trying to make himself out to be a saint. He's just being real in this particular situation, in these circumstances. He feels good that he was able to check in with himself, make an honest assessment, and do what's right with this potential compensation on the line. And again, I just think he should get massive credit and massive props for this. We're going to end on this clip where he says one more time, kind of reiterating this entire point and everything he said up till this point. But this is the crux. I'm a man of my word, and he can go to bed feeling happy, confident, powerful that he is a man of his word. He said something, he stuck to it, and there it is.
What is not good, bad, or anything, but to me, someone like you, it's fascinating that you would say like, oh, you'd be going against your word if you took this money, because ultimately the UFC is saying, take it. It's the same money, in my opinion, than the 10 and 10 that they gave you when you first signed. Now they're just course correcting and being like, you know what? On second thought, we actually think you deserved 15 and 15. So why not just take it?
Yeah, that's my
That's
whole
not going
point.
back on your word. That's not calling you a liar.
No, it's not, because
a bonus, right? If they want to give you a bonus in the locker room because they liked your fight, not an official bonus.
That's good.
What's the difference?
But guess what? The difference is they doing that because of the justice and because the government. So the government and
You're saying they force them?
Yeah, of course they forced them. UFC would not give them money if they didn't have to do the settlement. This is clear. They want money. They love money. But my whole problem with this narrative is this: we fighting, and this is like government. Was like Lyndon Johnson expand the welfare program in the United States. We're going to do that for the single moms that cannot work. Okay, but then 15 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, we see the debit in America because people doesn't care about what they say. They don't care about the words. They're gonna act in beneficial of them. And I like to think I'm not like them. I like to think that I am a man of my word, and I want my son one day to realize that. So that's my whole point, And again, I'm not saying I'm a saint. If the money was like 10 million, 3 million, 1 million, 2 million, I could have taken. But for this money, I'm not gonna do it. Okay, I'm not gonna do it.
That's it. And again, and I love that honesty. It's not. We can all fall victim to temptation, or we all may fall victim to our needs or our family needs or whatnot, right? Like, what if somebody in your family needs an expensive operation and this is now on the table, and it's like, oh no, I'm going to stand by my principles and let my loved one be ill or be in pain or something like that, right? Like, there's so many considerations. It's not clear cut, which is exactly why people can't really judge Moicano at all. You can't say he's this or that, or he made the wrong choice. For him, after making an honest assessment, given everything that's going on, he felt that this was the right decision for him. I don't see why it's so crazy for people to wrap their heads around this this decision. So anyways, I hope I've given you guys some clarity. I hope you guys enjoyed my breakdown. I thought it was a really good interview on Ariel's show. You guys should check out the full interview if you have time, but I thought this was a cool way to break it down and kind of itemize the points to some extent, and also weigh in and give my 2 cents, just because I feel like I hit the nail on the head with my video before this interview came out. So I'm patting myself on the back there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Thank you guys so much for joining, and we'll see you in the next video. Take it easy.